I never thought I'd feel guilty for trusting someone else's footstep in the darkness. But when you reach standing 200 meters underground, and the only sound you hear is your own breathing and water drops falling somewhere in the abyss, you begin to understand. Some things in this world exist beyond logic. Some things lead you home, and some drag you so deep that the surface becomes just a memory. I thought speleology teaches you to rely on facts. Rope tension, crack width, the direction of whistling air. The rule of 3 points of contact: always maintain contact with the rock in 3 places at once. Pocket path markers leave signs every 15 meters. Communication delay protocol: if you dawn, T-surface within 6 hours, search begins. These are iron rules that have saved thousands of lives. But there are things that science doesn't. To explain? There are things that have lived in darkness so long that become part of it. My name is Mark. I've been mapping caves for many years, among carabiners, lamps, and notes. A couple years ago, I met her, Elaine, a companion in gear and at the edge of maps. We became friends quickly. She could read the skeleton of rock like a book, and did it with a quiet, almost church-like attention. When we went into a system, she measured space with steps in silence. Elaine understood caves not just as geological formations. For her, they were living organisms with their own breath, their own pulse. I remember how once we stood in a huge grotto somewhere in the Seneca system, and she placed her palm on the wall. "Feel it?" she asked. "Everything here remembers. Every step, every word. Stone is the earth, this memory." I laughed then. I don't laugh about it now. She left a week ago. We had agreed to go together. Once she said there was something in her that called stronger than work. "There are places where the past holds tighter," she said, looking at the map. I remember how she nodded when I mentioned zones like Seneca Caverns and other karst systems in the area, local show caves and wild, unexplored systems. For her, this wasn't just a route, it was a path. Before her disappearance, we exchanged rare messages. Photos of walls with drops, short sounds, the rustle of water, air breathing heavily from below, and here and there barely visible pencil marks on stone, besides the usual markers. As if she was whispering, I was here. Her last message came at 3 a.m. Just coordinates. And one phrase: found what the old-timers talked about. Going deeper. She stopped answering. On the 6th day, I packed my backpack, took her things, her journal, some food, flashlights, spare batteries, and carabiners. I knew the system where she was headed. An old karst network in the Appalachians, known among local cavers as the Whisper. The name spoke for itself. You could always hear sounds there. Air movement through narrow cracks created acoustic effects that beginners mistook for voices. But Elaine wasn't a beginner. She knew the difference between echo and something more. At the entrance crevice, a half-hidden crawl, I saw old, slightly scratched cables and knots. They didn't look touristic, more like work gear. Someone had descended here not for fun. A thin rope, worn in places, led down to where light was like a promise. The cave smelled of moisture and old air. The stones were cold, pores overgrown with moss and deposits, the feeling that I had stepped into the body of a living mountain. I turned on my headlamp, its light cutting through darkness like a blade through dark fabric. Cavers know. Sound underground deceives. In karst voids, a footstep can sound 20 meters away from you or right behind your back, and they'll never understand where its source actually is. Echo layers, distorts, returns with delay. That is why we work in complete silence. Move slowly, listen to the rock. Along her trail marks, thin scratches on damp limestone, small arrows, numbers made with pencil. I walked, marking coordinate points on my GPS tracker so I could get out if needed. The rule is simple. Never go into a system without an evacuation plan. Never. After 3 hours of descent, I began losing my bearings. A grotto gave way to a narrow passage, the narrow to a drop, the drop to a shaft. Humid air whistled in the crevices, as if warning, this is no place for light. I felt the first signs of hypoxia, fatigue, slight dizziness, slowing of thought. At depth, oxygen content drops. Carbon dioxide accumulates in pockets. You breathe, but the air becomes heavy, thick. I needed to make stops, control my pulse, drink water. I followed protocol, but with each meter down, I understood Elaine was descending faster. She wasn't making stops. She seemed to be in a hurry. I heard a faint sound dripping, rhythmic, slow. But with it came a rustling sound as if someone was running their hand along the stone. I called her silence. Called again, only echo repeated. Then I started thinking, maybe no one was ever here. No, that is not true. Someone was. I saw marks. Fresh scratches on walls. Traces of rubber soles on wet clay. Someone had passed through here recently. Very recently. Half an hour later, I came across a camp. No, not a camp. In the tourist sense, just a primitive folding sleeping bag. Backpack. Metal flask. Empty crumpled can. All caver style. Compact. Rough, but functional. No light, no candle. Only the lamp I held in my hands remained. Around wet floor, drops falling regularly and quietly. Stones were plastered with deposits, but where she had sat, the ground was cleared. Small pieces of rock removed, as if someone had wiped away traces. On the pile of things, her laptop, protected, waterproof, turned off, and gloves with stains of dirt and dampness. And her journal. The last entry was clear but short. She is visible if you don to look directly. Don to seek light. Light cuts. If it leads, follow. But don to trust steps from the void. I remembered her words. Light cuts. Why? I didn't to understand. But I knew that light meant return. And she possibly chose not to return. I flipped back through the journal. Previous entries were detailed coordinates, wall sketches, passage width measurements. But then the handwriting changed, became more hurried, nervous, words layered over each other. Day 3, hear footsteps ahead, but when I go faster, they speed up too. When I stop, they freeze. This ISN, T echo. Echo doesn't, when you about to move. Day 4, found a hall, huge. Walls are worked, niches in the rock like beds. Someone lived here long, left traces, but didn't leave. Day 5, saw her, a woman, in the far corner of the hall. She stood motionless. I approached closer, she disappeared. But I know, she is here. She was always here. She was waiting. The last entry before the one I read first. They were not evil. They were just tired. Tired of light, of noise, of a world that demands too much. It is quiet here. Here you can just be. I understand them. Inside me, fear, cold, doubt, everything mixed. But I went further. I lit the lamp brighter, installed an additional battery on my backpack, checked the carabiner and rappel devices. I was preparing for a serious route. In such systems, it is customary to check air supply, fasteners, and belay points every 30 to 45 minutes. That is what they teach in courses. I walked along a narrow passage, walls getting closer, ceiling lower. Air became heavier, breathing harder. With each breath, the feeling of the world was age. I counted contact points. Left hand on a ledge, right foot on a step, right hand in a crack, 3 points of contact. Always 3 points. This keeps you in reality. And then I heard footsteps. Quiet, sliding. A voice? Mark? Came a female whisper? It was her voice. I looked around. Nothing. Turned the lamp brighter, darkness remained. Footsteps again. And a whisper. This way. I stopped. Every instinct screamed, Dawn, to go. But it was her voice. I would recognize it out of 1,000. Intonation, timbre, even the slight aspiration on consonants, everything matched. I moved and saw a silhouette, a figure I could trust. Elaine walked like water, soundless, her movements smooth, confident. I approached, said, Elaine, are you alive? But the flashlight beam reflected off her face so that her eyes became dull, empty, like enamel. She said nothing, just extended her hand. I took her palm. The skin was cool, cold, too cold. I thought I felt a slight tremor, as if she wasn't touching me, but simply existing nearby. She turned and walked further. I followed. Her steps quiet, almost weightless. A light whistle of air accompanied our descent into the depths. I walked in her tracks, by the marks she left. 3 scratches, an arrow to the left wall, the number 7. With each step, I increasingly felt that we weren't just going deeper into the mountain, but deeper into memory. Stones around thickened, air became dense like fabric. The flashlight beam began to tremble, and it seemed the walls themselves were breathing. I tried to leave a marker, took reflective tape from my pocket, stuck it on the wall. Turned around, the tape was gone, as if the rock didn't need my marks, as if it knew I wouldn't return this way. We emerged into a hall, a huge chamber where the walls were level. Not perfectly, but enough to notice. Someone had trimmed protrusions, made steps, laid tiles not like a tourist, but like a resident. Along the edges, rows of niches carved for seats and beds. In some, remains of dry grass. In others, fingerprint casts, impressions that couldn't have appeared by chance. I knew about such places from archival records. In the 19th century, during the Industrial Revolution, some communities went underground, escaping noise, disease, overpopulation. They created autonomous settlements in caves, installed ventilation shafts, built water collectors. Some lived there for years, some for decades, and then disappeared. Simply disappeared, without a trace. In the center of the hall, faint light. Not flashlights, not candles, strange, soft light, like mountain tears. Bioluminescence? Phosphorescent minerals? I couldn't understand the source. It didn't cast sharp shadows. Everything was muted, quiet. I saw figures. They moved slowly, soundlessly, their faces pale, eyes dark. They didn't look creepy. They looked calm, like those who had long grown accustomed to silence, to mountain depths, to eternity. One of them approached. He asked, didn't he call? Just laid his hand on my shoulder, laid it as if stroking water. I felt the earthly world became alien. My body became light, inappropriate. I choked on the feeling of alienness. Wanted to call Elaine, but she was nearby, smoothly looking at me with those empty eyes. In her hand, a notebook. She opened it and there were words. Not her handwriting. Not mine. You retired, but you were not alone. I wanted to step back, wanted to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't obey, as if roots had dug into the stone. One of the people said quietly, "You can leave, but not today." His voice a whisper of long-stilled wind. She looked at me without joy, without pain, and smiled. A thin, almost imperceptible smile, the kind I heard in her journal before disappearing, tired, calm. I understood. She wasn't the one I was calling. This was her shadow, her echo, perhaps her spirit, perhaps just an image summoned to lead. I felt my consciousness waver. I tried to remember the sun, home, roads, the smell of coffee in the morning, my mother's face, friends, laughter, everything that connected me to the surface. And then she, Elaine, shadow, took my hand. I felt emptiness beneath my feet. The cold pull of light carried me down. I tried to grab the stone, but my hands passed through. I grabbed her hand, but her hand was only memory, a dense cold covering that fell away like a scrap of old fabric. I listened and heard a voice. It was her voice, but not in the familiar tone. It was a voice recorded by echo and returned from distance, a voice intertwined with those who had lived there for centuries. "Mark," she whispered, and in her voice there was neither remorse nor fear, only peace. "I am with you. You're not alone." I don't remember how I found myself again in the previous corridor. I only remember that when I came to, I was alone. Elaine, these marks were everywhere, her things, but she herself had disappeared, as if dissolved into the wall. When I came to, I was alone, returned to that narrow corridor where it all began. Sleeping bag and backpack untouched. Stone around clean, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had. But there, in the depths, traces of her hands remained. Carved nests and wall shelves that she loved to clean in her notes. On the table, her mug, dull from tea stains. Her journal closed, on the last page, a new entry. I didn't write it. The handwriting was similar to mine, but not quite. The words were simple, done, to trust steps that seemed familiar. I vowed, I'll find her. I returned to the surface, informed the authorities, attracted volunteers, but learned quickly, large operations in such systems require resources and approvals. Federal teams checked only to a known level. History repeated itself, like in old documents. Cave communities are rare, and interfering is a complex legal and ethical knot. Gradually, interest waned. People said, she left of her own will. She found a place where she wants to live. It seemed to me that this wasn't true, that she was dragged away, or maybe she left on her own. I didn't, Still done. Several weeks passed. I continued returning. Sometimes I found things that should have said, she was here yesterday. Fresh crumpled blanket, footprints of new length, a clump of hair on a stone bench. One day I found another journal. Its pages were written by me, but the handwriting was different. The entries spoke in first person, as if about how I had already made a choice, and it was happy. I remember how only a whisper remained from her in the corner. You'll be able to go when you ready. Sometimes, returning to the surface, I saw lights on the cliff. Not fires and not flashlights, but even lines of light that moved inside, as if someone was strolling along an underground alley. People said they'd seen this for decades, lights that followed along the same corridors every winter. Some called it the remnant of an old society, some the birth of a myth. I no longer knew what to believe. I knew only one thing. The world divides into those who stay in the light and those who choose another way to live. A month later, I returned and discovered that one of the entrance barriers had been neatly repaired. Stones, recently sealed, were polished. Someone came and fixed the passage so it wouldn't look like someone had dragged people away. Someone wanted the entrance to look closed. This was strange. They cared about the rules of light. I understood and feared at the same time. If they don't want contact, it means they have internal justice. Their own order, their own laws. At night, I woke up and heard footsteps in the house, as if someone was walking outside my room. It was the same echo I heard in the labyrinths, repeating, voice-like. Sometimes I felt a touch on my arm, cold, as if someone had run fingers across my wrist and left an imprint there. A year later, in the archive, I found mentions in old research journals describing similar settlements, people who voluntarily went underground to create autonomous societies long before modern urbanism. There were words about ventilation, water channels, shifted stone walls, everything I had seen with my own eyes. These facts didn't explain what actually happened, but gave the story structure. These were puzzle pieces from which you could assemble a picture, but not know the artist. I don't know where Elaine is now. Sometimes I like to imagine her among those who set up an underground city there. Her face calm, without illness or demands, with a book in her hands and a notebook nearby. Sometimes I imagine her as a shadow, lost and stretched out, one that continues to lead travelers deeper because she herself can no longer break free. I leave this space for your imagination. You know what scares me most? That sometimes I understand the simplest explanation may be the truest. She left voluntarily. And this doesn't diminish what happened at all. It makes the story more complex. Can you condemn a person for choosing to find a different order? Can you take away their desire for silence? And if it was a deal, what did they give in return? I returned there repeatedly, recorded my steps, fixed coordinates. Sometimes it seemed to me I heard her voice behind me, in the darkest section of the corridor. I would turn, and there was only the breath of stone. But I heard, "Don't be afraid." And I still believe those words are both command and forgiveness. All I can tell you for certain, in the Appalachians there are places where humanity and mountain touch so that boundaries are erased. There, people know how to live differently. They done to demonstrate themselves and done to seek glory. They learn to keep silence, and it seems this is better for them. If you ever find yourself at a crevice in the mountain and hear a familiar voice calling you to follow, remember, the steps of a loved one can be the last light, leading back to the surface, or be a bridge that leads away into where others live. I'll leave you space for guesses. I'll leave her image untouched, a woman whose whisper can be both salvation and trap. And if you want to believe I'll find her believed. I continue searching. I make maps. I leave marks. I don't believe in heroism that ends in sudden sacrifice. I believe that sometimes people choose their own escape, and this is no less a tragedy. The end, or the beginning. I read between the lines. Done to chase those who left, if you don't, to have the readiness to stay. Maybe that's her last message. Maybe it to say warning. If you ask me now, I'd answer briefly. We had a choice, light or silence. Someone chose silence. Someone still lives in it, and leaves lights that move along the same route so that those who are lost can believe that someone is following them, but doesn't always lead back. Thank you for listening to the end. This channel is growing thanks to people like you, and I really appreciate it. If you liked the story, please like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with those who love stories like this. I release new content 3 or 4 times a week. So there's always something to listen to. Write your thoughts in the comments. I read everything. See you in the next episode. Take care.